All right, so welcome everybody. Again, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brett Williams. I am the new climate focal point here. And joining me today is Jason Runyon, who is our tropical weather focal point. So he will be giving a rundown of the hurricane season outlook. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just a brief spring 2018 in review. We had above normal temperatures across the region. Most areas were below normal for precipitation. There were a few exceptions. And then here's our four climate sites of San Antonio, Austin, Mabry, and Bergstrom, and Del Rio, showing you where they ranked in terms of warmest and driest, or in the case of Bergstrom, the wettest. So you can see 3 to 4 sites, we were below normal precip. We were above normal temperatures at all sites. This is the 90-day temperature departure, so the springtime temperature departures in degrees Celsius across the nation. You can see Texas is pretty warm there. And Dr. Nielsen Gaiman at Texas A&M University, the state climatologist, did announce that it was the second warmest May on record for the entire state of Texas. A little severe weather and flash flooding recap. We issued 71 total warnings here at the office, 61 severe thunderstorm warnings, only 3 tornado warnings, and only 7 flash flood warnings. There are all the polygons overlaid on the map of our area. We had a total of 82 total severe weather reports, and there's an overlay of the LSRs that we issued here from this spring. We only had 2 heavy rain events this spring. The first was on March 28th. 6 inches of rain fell at Austin Bergstrom. You can see quite a bit of rain fell, basically along the escarpment and points east. We had a lot of flash flooding issues on this day across the San Antonio and Austin metro areas. Then we had another heavy rain event on May 4th. This one was actually kind of on the flip side. It was Austin area and then up into the hill country, primarily west of the Interstate 35 corridor. We had 5 total severe hail reports from this spring, that being greater than 1 inch or quarter-sized hail. 10 of those reports were over 2 inches in diameter, and we had 5 reports of giant hail, baseballs or bigger. Almost all of those came from this particular day here on March 18th, where we had reports of 4 to 5 inch hail across Bastrop County in the Smithville area. And you can hear some of the reports that we got in the Smithville area, some very, very large hail that fell. Fortunately, the hail avoided the major metropolitan areas this spring. So looking ahead to summer, obviously severe weather dramatically decreases after May as we get the subtropical ridge to set in, kind of get a general lack of forcing mechanisms such as frontal passages, and we kind of lose the stronger upper level winds, so we don't really get that deep wind shear that we need to generate sustained updrafts and storms. However, flash flood reports do historically increase heading into June and July, which makes sense for June as it's the second wettest month in Austin and Del Rio and the wettest in San Antonio. July is a bit of an enigma since it is a drier month at all sites. However, we had some flash flooding issues with a large number of reports from July of 02 and 07 that skews that data. So even though severe weather is dropping off significantly now as we head into summer, we're starting to head into kind of our bigger flash flood time frame. Here's just a little graph showing you daily chance of rain. You can see the yellow lines are Austin, San Antonio, group those together, and the green is Del Rio. And the top line is daily precipitation greater than or equal to 1/100 of an inch. So you can see that we're definitely coming down now as we head into June, July, and August. Decreases from about 25 to 30% in middle of May to only about 10 to 15% in early August. Then we kind of get an increase there by the end of August as we head into late summer, early fall. So looking at the 90 and 180-day rainfall as of June 4th, so this does include the heavy rain event that we had across portions of Williamson, Travis, Burnett, and Blanco counties the other night. We have been drier than normal over both the last 90 and 180 days. For the majority of the region, there are a few notable exceptions, which I have highlighted here in the red. It's been especially dry across the Rio Grande, however, checking out along Valverde into Maverick and Canyon counties. For the drought outlook, currently, or at least it's from the outlook released last Thursday, so on the 29th, 70% of south central Texas is dry. 37% of it is in drought right now of some form. You can kind of see on the bottom there, I've got 3 images from March 27th, April 24th, and May 29th, showing you the evolution of the drought conditions across the entire state of Texas as well. So you see that we've had a little bit of improvement up in the Panhandle but still some pretty extreme drought conditions up there. We've had a little bit of improvement over what we had at the end of March, but still have some issues primarily out west and along the Rio Grande. And from the Climate Prediction Center, their seasonal drought outlook, this was released on May 17th, and it's valid through the end of August. They show drought development likely across almost the entirety of our area here in South Central Texas, drought persisting in areas that are currently in drought. Going down to the short-term temperature and precip outlooks, these were updated yesterday by the Climate Prediction Center. So the 6 to 10 day on top and the 8 to 14 day on bottom. You can see that we're moderately favored for above normal temperatures in the short to couple week term here, but it does show even chances for precipitation or about near normal. However, at least in the next 7 day outlook, looking at the global models and looking at our forecast, and additionally looking at what the Weather Prediction Center just put out with their 7 day QPF outlook, looks like pretty good odds that we'll be dry here at least in the next 7 days. Moving on now to the June and then the summer outlooks. You can see that June is strongly favored for warmer than normal temperatures, slightly favored for drier than normal. And then heading into the summertime, June, July, and August, again, we're about moderately tilted toward warmer than normal temperatures. And they show about even chances for precipitation as we head into the summer months. So less of a signal there either way. So about for ENSO, El Nino, La Nina, we are currently in ENSO-neutral conditions. We just came out of a weak La Nina. The current ONI is -0.4. So we're currently in El Nino neutral conditions, or ENSO-neutral. And so we have equatorial sea surface temperatures now are near average across most of the Pacific. The Climate Prediction Center, bottom right here graph shows you their predictions, a bunch of different models, basically an ensemble here. And they show, they predict ENSO-neutral through September to November, with about a 50% chance of El Nino developing by winter of 2018-2019. However, I will note that the forecast skill this time of year is not that great for the winter time, looking ahead toward the winter. And in fact, this time last year, CPC showed about a 45% chance of El Nino developing by winter, and what ended up happening is we actually went back into a weak La Nina. So, not exactly great forecast skill for that, but it does look like at least we will be ENSO-neutral at least through the summer and into the early to mid-fall. And with that, I will send over to Jason Running here, and he will go over some of the tropical weather outlook.
Okay, we'll first start with a little bit of climatology with respect to Texas. On the left there, if you weren't familiar with the stats, prior to Hurricane Harvey last year, we were in our second longest hurricane-free period here in Texas, with the longest being 9 seasons that we had gone from 1990 to 1998 without a landfalling hurricane. This dates back to the mid-1850s. So Hurricane Harvey obviously broke that streak, and you can see the streaks there, 9, 8, 7, and 5 seasons of how long we've gone. Interesting, I pulled up some stats to see what happened with respect to the seasons following that if we had landfalling systems. And when we broke that streak in 1999, we did not have another hurricane hit Texas for another 3 or 4 years. Same thing with 1979 and 1928. 1864, 1954, 1886, when we broke those 7 and 5 season streaks respectively, we did have a landfalling hurricane the following season. Nothing statistically we can say about how that correlates to this season, but just an interesting fact to throw out there. On the right there is what we average here in Texas as far as landfalling tropical cyclones by month. You can see as we get into June, there is a temporary peak in tropical activities, especially tropical storms that make landfall into Texas. And then we get into a relative lull on average throughout the month of July and the first part of August before we ramp up into the main peak of the hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin in late August and September. And then with respect to Texas, tropical cyclones by month fall off significantly in the month of October. As far as climatological areas of origins where tropical cyclones typically form, upper left image there is the month of June. It favors the Gulf of Mexico and portions of the Western Caribbean Sea. The month of July, as we saw in that lull there in the previous slide in the graph, there is a slight lull there in the western Gulf of Mexico with respect to origins of tropical systems. But when we ramp up into the peak of hurricane season in late August and September, you can start to see where climatologically favored areas of the Atlantic Basin are and their tracks of those systems. So with respect to the hurricane outlook for 2018, the NOAA Climate Prediction Center looks at a number of indicators, and one of the main indicators they do look at is the ENSO forecast that Brett just went through. So El Nino and La Nina and neutral conditions do have a tie to the Atlantic Basin tropical cyclone season. Typically during El Nino years, that tends to subdue the tropical season in the Atlantic Ocean, whereas we see, on average, active seasons in the Atlantic Basin when we have La Nina conditions in the Pacific Ocean. So with respect to this season, as Brett went through the outlook there, we are in a neutral pattern right now, ENSO-neutral pattern. That is forecasted to hold through the summer months with possibly an increasing likelihood of El Nino conditions as we get into the late fall months. We put together this last year, if you were on our climate webinar last year. This breaks down just the Gulf of Mexico and where we see tropical cyclones tracking to the Gulf of Mexico based on what phase we are in the ENSO cycle. So in the top left image there, this dates back to 1981. We've had 8 years during the tropical seasons when we were in El Nino conditions. And you can see the western Gulf of Mexico with respect to the neutral condition graph, neutral condition map on the top right and the La Nina condition map on the bottom left. The western Gulf of Mexico during El Nino conditions is much more quiet relative to neutral in the La Nina years. Also of note, as far as Texas strikes go, we are twice as likely to get a tropical storm or hurricane strike into the coast of Texas during La Nina or neutral conditions versus El Nino conditions. Another indicator the Climate Prediction Center looks at for their seasonal outlook is sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean. These are sea surface temperatures as of yesterday, quite warm right now in the Gulf of Mexico. When you look at this as far as anomalies go for this time of year, what stands out here is the Gulf of Mexico is above average as far as temperatures go and portions of the North Atlantic Ocean. But when you look at what we call the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean, that stretches from the Caribbean Sea through the subtropical Atlantic Ocean to the coast of Africa, where we get those long track systems that develop. Currently, the water temperatures are cooler than they should be this time of year. And so this is the graph of looking just at the main development region, again, the Caribbean Sea to the subtropical Atlantic, of sea surface temperature anomalies from the spring months through now. You can see this trend downwards into this cooler than normal water temperatures over the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. And so what's going to happen with that? Is the Atlantic Ocean going to stay cool? Are we going to warm back up? Well, when we look at our climate forecast system model, that does show neutral water conditions, a warming of the waters taking place through the main development region by August through October. So this is looking at the August through October time frame, and it does show a warming trend of that area of the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. I should also note that the Climate Prediction Center did point out that this time last year there was cooler than normal water temperatures over the Atlantic Ocean, in particular the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. And the climate forecast system models last year were too slow at warming the Atlantic Ocean. So that's just something to keep in mind. And we want to point out the top graph here. This kind of looks back all the way to 1950 as far as anomalies go in the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean, anomalies in the sea surface temperatures. And you can see the trends upward, especially as you get from the mid-1990s onward. And that corresponds to our multi-decadal oscillation that we see in the Atlantic Ocean. And we've been in this very active period since the mid-1990s through now in the Atlantic Ocean. So despite there being anomalously cool water temperatures right now, overall, compared to the 70s and 80s, the water temperatures during the August through October time frame from the mid-1990s on are statistically higher. This graph here kind of looks at what I was describing as far as the multi-decadal cycle. So we have an underlying signal beyond ENSO and the sea surface temperatures that are currently out there, and these multi-decadal cycles that I described since the mid-1990s, a very high activity era in the Atlantic Basin. This basically looks at the ACE index, which accounts for combined intensity of storms every year and the duration of those tropical storms and hurricanes through their life cycle. And so you can see the high activity era that was in place during the 1950s and 60s, a relative lull during the 70s and 80s and first part of the 90s. And then since about 1995 onward, we've been in a relatively high active era in the Atlantic Basin with respect to tropical systems. So the official NOAA hurricane outlook reflects predictions for ENSO-neutral conditions for a weak El Nino that Brett described. That weak El Nino would not set in until late in the hurricane season. So basically after kind of the peak of the Texas season goes with respect to kind of August and September as our peak. It also takes into account predictions for the near average sea surface temperatures that are forecasted to develop by August and September over the main development region, and also near average and weaker shear conditions associated with that ongoing high activity era for the Atlantic hurricane basin that I described earlier. So the official NOAA hurricane outlook calls for a 75% chance of near normal or above normal activity in the Atlantic Basin, 40% chance of near normal conditions, a 35% chance of above normal conditions. We set ranges of 10 to 16 named storms this year, 5 to 9 hurricanes, and 1 to 4 major hurricanes, with major hurricanes being Cat 3s or stronger. On average, we typically see about 11 named storms, 6 of those becoming hurricanes and 2 of those becoming major hurricanes. So that's kind of it with the outlook. I just want to kind of point out some changes to National Hurricane Center products that are coming out. First one I wanted to kind of point out actually was a change that took place during the 2017 season, and that was what we call the potential tropical cyclone advisories. So prior to prior to 2017, we had no way of actually starting advisories on systems until they had actually closed off and we had a closed low associated with the system. So if something were to quickly spin up, say in the western Gulf of Mexico, like Tropical Storm Bill did a few years ago, we had no way of actually starting advisories on that until it actually formed a low-level center. And I point that out because watches and warnings are tied to the advisory. So we have no way essentially of hoisting watches and warnings until a closed low formed. Well, last year they began the issuances of potential tropical cyclone advisories. So basically they can now look at their suite of models, and if they see the potential for a tropical cyclone to form that will threaten land within the next 48 hours where they would need to hoist a watch or a warning, we can now start tropical cyclone advisories. And so that will continue this year and in future seasons as well. Also wanted to point out the cone of error that we call a tropical cyclone potential track error. And we just want to stress that there's some flaws to using this as a briefing tool. We shouldn't associate impacts with this potential track area. This is just a best forecast of where the track of the center will go based on the Hurricane Center's forecast. It says nothing about impacts. And so here's 2 perfect case examples from previous storms, Hurricane Ike back in 2008. The image you see there overlaid on top of the cone, the image of the orange circle there is the radius of tropical storm force winds. And you can see the large radius of tropical storm force winds that extends well outside the error cone from the National Hurricane Center. The image there on the right was the error cone for Hurricane Harvey. And of course, we all know that the heavy rainfall that fell in the Houston and Beaumont area, 60 inches of rain in the Beaumont area that fell outside of the cone. Why do I point that out? Because the cones are getting smaller over the years. The cones, the way they bound those cones are tied to historical track errors of the last 5 years. So are their track errors getting better? In this image you see here, this graph you see here since 1990, the lines, and the red line there are all the errors associated with the 24-hour forecast from the National Hurricane Center for each storm. The green line is the 48-hour forecast. The lighter yellow line, the 3-day forecast, and so on and so forth. And so you can see since 1990s, the track errors have steadily been getting better for the National Hurricane Center. And in fact, when you compare the 2-day forecast track errors from 1990 to where they are 2 years ago in 2016, you can see the big differences on how much better they've gotten as far as forecasting where the center of storms will go. And that's great that we're able to forecast those better, but the impact radius of the impacts of heavy rainfall and how far the winds extend out and storm surge certainly isn't getting smaller. So here's where where they set the bounds of those cones are based on historical averages or historical forecast errors from the previous 5 years. And they set those errors, the bounds of those error cones, based on the fact that 2/3 of their forecast fell within that cone the previous 5 years, which means 1/3 of the time the center actually traveled outside of the cone. You can see in 2017 the errors that they had of their 12, 24, 36, 48, 72, all the way up to the 120-hour forecast. And here in red, you can see the numbers are getting even smaller. So the error cone is getting even smaller. Averages are nice to know. The 5-year historical track errors are nice to know, but every storm is different. Here are the track errors for last year's storms. And the bars that you see there are their 1-day, 2-day, all the way out to 5-day average errors for each storm. And then the yellow and green dashed line horizontally that you see are their 5-year averages for the 2-day and 3-day forecast. And so you can see with Hurricane Harvey and Irma and Maria, they did quite well with their track forecasts last year. But there's some storms last year that they did not do quite as well with. So just remember, every storm will be different. Also wanted to point out the Hurricane Center's track errors by intensity. They typically do a little worse on average with the weaker storms, the tropical depressions and weak tropical storms, compared to the stronger tropical storms and hurricanes. They tend to do much better with the track forecast with hurricanes. That kind of leads me to my final message I wanted to deliver here, as far as not getting too caught up with that error cone and briefing more on the impacts. And we want to stress emphasizing the danger of each hazard, and we want to stress that 90% of all the fatalities associated with hurricanes come from water, come from storm surge, surf, and inland flooding combined. It does not come from the wind. And so certainly we can have inland flooding issues here in South Central Texas. So you want to focus on what's most important, and that's communicating the forecasted impacts from tropical cyclones versus that error cone. We also want to point out to use and encourage sharing on social media official Hurricane Center forecast, and only sharing reliable sources on social media. And highlighting the hazards that continue after the storms pass. So even as storms kind of weaken over inland areas, they can often bring heavy rainfall for days and days afterwards, and we want to stress that here in South Central Texas. So I'm going to turn it back over to Brett, who's going to take you through the rest of the summer outlook with respect to fire weather and other impacts here.
All right, thanks, Jason. So as far as the fire weather impacts outlook for the summertime, broken up by kind of the first half and the second half of the summer. We are experiencing dry conditions presently, with drought expected to persist and intensify across the region, as well as above normal temperatures expected to continue. And then the two figures at the bottom there are energy release component graphs for the hill country on the left and the Central Texas on the right. And you can see that black line here, that's this year, 2018, the present ERCs are currently on their way up, and they are above average, which is this little light gray line, and they're above what they were last year, which is this kind of dotted blue line. All those things considered, at least for the short term, June through mid-July, forecasting about normal as far as fire weather impacts. If the dry conditions do continue, then I would anticipate possibility of getting above normal impacts for fire weather concerns as we head into the latter half of the summer. And then now kind of wrapping everything up here, again, mildly favored for above normal temperatures this summer, slightly favored for below normal precip at least through June, and then no real strong signal either way for the rest of the summer. Drought conditions expected to develop and intensify across much of the area. ENSO-neutral likely to persist through October to November, with El Nino possibly developing by wintertime. And then the Hurricane Center predicting a 35% chance of above normal season, a 40% chance of near normal season in the Atlantic Basin, coming out to about a 75% chance for near or above normal. So wrapping up all the impacts here, for severe weather, no real strong signal either way. Again, we're kind of heading out of the primary severe weather season. So even a normal severe weather season in the summertime probably wouldn't really give us a whole lot in terms of severe weather. For fire weather, like I just said, possibility of getting to above normal later half of the summer, conditional on the continued lack of precipitation. Heavy rainfall, I've kind of hedged that just a little bit below normal for the short term, primarily basing that upon the June outlook for precipitation. Then heading back closer toward normal as we head toward the latter half of the summer, and no real strong signal either way on that. Typically, for the later part of the summer, our heavy rainfall events are primarily controlled by landfalling tropical systems. So if we happen to get one, we'll probably have a little bit of an uptick on that. River flooding, we have hedged those below normal, primarily due to our antecedent dry conditions. We've been super dry across the area, so the rivers can probably handle a little more rainfall if heavy rainfall were to occur. So I've kind of hedged down to a little bit below normal for that. And again, tropical, at least in the short term, have that about normal, and then hedging it to slightly above normal as we head into toward middle July into August, and that's based upon the weather outlook for the hurricanes this summer into the early fall. So with that, that concludes the webinar, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to send them in chat, and we'll do our best to answer those.